Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I bid you welcome from wherever you're watching or listening. Welcome to the Nerdivergent channel. I am your host, Nerdivergent. Today, I'll be taking a look at the movie Condorman from 1981, a live action Disney superhero spy comedy starring Michael Crawford, Barbara Carrera, Oliver Reed, and James Hampton. And I have to say, this is one of those movies where the title tells you almost everything and absolutely nothing at the same time. Condorman. That sounds like either a forgotten superhero, a discount air conditioner brand, or a guy at a birth sanctuary who got way too emotionally invested in his job. But no, this is a Disney movie about a comic book artist who wants his superhero stories to be realistic. So he dresses up like his own character, jumps off the Eiffel Tower, gets mixed up with the CIA, and ends up helping a Soviet agent defect to the West. So, yes, this is a Disney friendly comedy, a spy movie, a superhero movie, a Cold War adventure, a romance, and a gadget filled action movie all at once. And somehow, that is both the problem and the charm. But before we get into it, would you please hit that like and subscribe and the bell at the bottom to get all of my latest reviews? I'm trying to get to 100 subs, and your help is very much appreciated. Now, let's get into it. Condorman is one of those early 80s Disney live action movies that feels like the studio was trying to figure out where the movies were going next. This was after Superman had already shown that audiences would accept a superhero movie as a big theatrical event. James Bond was still popular, spy gadgets were still fun, car chases were still a major selling point, and Disney looked at all of that and said, what if we did our own version, but made it safe enough to watch with the whole family? That is not a bad idea. In fact, on paper, it's a pretty fun idea. This is a movie about Woody Wilkins, played by Michael Crawford, who is a comic book writer and illustrator. Woody is not just drawing a superhero named Condorman, he wants to test everything his character does so the comic will feel authentic. That is the kind of decision that sounds admirable until you remember the movie opens with him dressed like a giant bird and jumping off the Eiffel Tower. And let's be honest, there are easier ways to research flight. You could talk to a pilot. You could visit an airport. You could maybe start with a ladder. But Woody decides, no, I need to jump off a French landmark in a homemade bird suit. That is not research. That's a cry for help with wings. The wings work for about 3 seconds, which is honestly where my stomach sunk, because who hasn't dressed up like Superman and jumped off the roof of your parents' van that had a ladder on the back? Oh, wait, that might have just been in my family. Continuing on, and right away, that tells you what kind of movie this is. Condorman is not really about a polished superhero. This is not Superman. This is not Batman. This is not some bitten by something radioactive or chosen by ancient prophecy. This is a guy who draws his own hero, believes in the idea so much that he tries to become him, and then somehow fails upward into international espionage. Condorman was produced by the Walt Disney Productions and directed by Charles Jarrett. It was suggested by the novel The Game of X by Robert Sheckley, though from what I can tell, the movie takes the spy comedy foundation and then straps a giant bird costume to it. And that is really where Condorman lives. It's a part spy parody, part superhero origin, and part Disney adventure comedy. This is not a movie that feels like it was made because somebody had a deeply personal story they needed to tell. This feels more like someone looked at James Bond, Superman, Saturday morning cartoons, and the toy catalog, and then said, yes, all of it. Put it in the movie. Condorman is what happens when Disney tries to make James Bond, but the closest thing they can get to a license to kill is a license to mildly inconvenience the Soviet Union. And honestly, that is kind of amazing, because the movie is very much of its time. You can feel the Cold War backdrop. You can feel the Bond influence. You can feel the desire to make a heroic character kids could cheer for. But you can also feel the movie struggling to decide if Woody is supposed to be a real hero, a parody hero, or just a lucky maniac in a bird suit. Condorman follows Woody Wilkins, a cartoonist living in Paris, who is obsessed with making his comic book superhero feel real. His friend Harry, played by James Hampton, works for the CIA, but Harry is not some super spy field agent, he is more of a file clerk, which is important because the movie is not about elite professionals making smart decisions. This is a movie about normal people being dragged into a spy story because apparently the CIA looked around and said, "Do we have anyone less qualified?" And somehow the answer was Woody. Harry needs someone to handle what is supposed to be a simple civilian paper exchange in Istanbul. The Russians want a civilian involved, Woody is available, and before you know it, this comic book artist is meeting Natalia, played by Barbara Carrera. Natalia thinks Woody is a real spy. Woody, instead of saying, "No, I'm a cartoonist with questionable survival instincts," tells her that he is Condorman. And that right there is the movie. Everything that happens after this is basically the universe punishing Woody for committing too hard to the bit part he is supposed to play. Natalia becomes convinced that Condorman is a real top-level agent. Her boss and former romantic connection, Krakow, played by Oliver Reed, also starts taking this ridiculous idea seriously. And before too long, Woody's fantasy life crashes directly into a real spy mission. This is where the movie has a fun hook. Woody has spent his life creating a hero on paper, but once everyone starts believing Condorman is real, he has to decide whether he is just pretending or whether he can actually rise to the moment. That is a solid idea, a comic book artist forced to become the hero he created. That should work. That is a strong setup for a fun adventure movie. But Condorman does not always know how to balance the joke with the adventure. Sometimes it wants Woody to be a lovable idiot. Sometimes it wants him to be a charming underdog. Sometimes it wants him to be a legit action hero. And sometimes it just wants to show you a vehicle chase, a gadget, or an exploding boat. And to be fair, I'm not always opposed to an exploding boat. The strange thing about Condorman is that the movie is not boring in concept. There is a great idea buried in here. A comic book creator becomes his own character. That is a fun fantasy. It's the same kind of childlike idea that makes you think, what if the thing I made up became real? And that makes it a little different. Woody is not stepping into a fantasy world. He's trying to force the real world to operate by comic book logic. That is the movie's best idea. The problem is the real world in the movie keeps bending around him instead of pushing back as hard as it should. Woody is not competent enough to be James Bond, but he is also not helpless enough for the comedy to always work. He survives because the movie likes him, not always because he earned it. But that silliness is also part of the charm. Condorman is the kind of movie where you either accept the nonsense early on, or you will spend the whole movie asking questions like, why is the CIA letting this happen? Why does everyone believe this man is a master spy? Who approved this budget? How much money did the car cost? And why does the movie have more confidence in a bird costume than some modern superhero movies have in their entire cinematic universes? After the initial mission, Natalia wants a defect and she specifically asks for Condorman to handle it. That means Woody now has to become the character he lied about being. And instead of the CIA saying, absolutely not, this man almost died in a homemade flying suit, they basically say, sure, why not? This is where the movie starts leaning into its gadget side. Woody gets to design vehicles and tools based on his comic book imagination. That includes the Condorman suit, a cane with built-in features, a customized sports car, and later a boat chase that feels like Disney is trying to do a Roger Moore Bond-era sequence without getting too dangerous for the family audience. And honestly, some of this stuff is fun. The Condormobile is ridiculous, but memorable. The car to boat transformation has that old school practical movie magic feel. The chase sequences may not be as slick as what other spy movies were doing at the time, but they have a handmade quality that gives the movie personality. It does not always look convincing, but it looks like people tried. And I will usually take not perfect but ambitious over technically polished but soulless. Condorman is not a movie where the special effects always work, but it is a movie where you can see the crew saying, what if the car turned into a boat? And then actually trying to make that happen. That counts for something. The movie has locations, gadgets, costumes, chases, villains, spies, and romantic adventure tone that give it a bigger feeling than the story probably deserves. At the same time, you can see why critics at the time did not fully buy into it. The movie came out after audiences had seen Superman fly, they had seen bigger action films, sharper spy films, and more confident effects work than what is in this movie. So when Condorman comes along with visible limitations, broad comedy, and a hero who feels more like a Mel Brooks parody movie about James Bond's emotionally unstable cousin, you can see why it's not so well known. But watching it now, that is also what makes it interesting. It's not cool, it's not slick, it's not modern, yet it has a soundtrack that will stick with you, and a story that will make you think this is a great movie for the whole family. It's a strange little Disney artifact from a time when studios were still trying to figure out what live-action family adventure could be. Michael Crawford plays Woody with a lot of energy. He's goofy, awkward, overly committed, and continuously acting like the story is in his head is more real than the danger in front of him. And that is both good and bad. When the movie works, Woody feels like a lovable dreamer who finally gets a chance to prove that imagination can matter. When the movie doesn't work, he feels like someone who should have been stopped by 3 different government agencies before lunch. Barbara Carrera as Natalia brings a lot of elegance to the movie. She is really the character who gives the plot its reason to move forward. Without her, Woody is just a guy testing a birdsuit and drawing comics in Paris. Natalia is the reason the fantasy becomes a mission. Oliver Reed, who plays Krakow, is also a major part of this movie's charm. He is taking the material seriously enough to give the villain some weight, even when the movie around him is asking you to accept a superhero named Condorman. That is not easy, and he pulls it off marvelously. If you can play the villain opposite a comic book Birdman and still make the movie feel like it has stakes, you are doing something right, and you are a master performer. James Hampton as Harry gives the movie a useful buddy dynamic. Harry knows Woody is not a real spy, but he also keeps getting pulled deeper into Woody's nonsense, and that gives the movie some of its more enjoyable moments because Harry often feels like the only person who understands the absurdity of it all. I won't go too much further into the movie except to say this. Condorman is one of those movies where the setup is stronger than the execution, but the execution is odd enough that it becomes part of the appeal. This is not a forgotten masterpiece, but it is also not some lifeless failure. It has too much personality for that. It is a movie about imagination, delusion, spy gadgets, Cold War nonsense, and a man who believes so deeply in his fictional hero that reality eventually gives up and lets him play along. That is kind of charming. The movie asks a simple question. What if the hero you created on paper became the role you had to live up to? And while Condorman does not always answer the question as strongly as it could, it still gives you something memorable. Condorman may not soar, but it flaps with confidence, and sometimes that's enough to keep a weird little Disney movie in the air. This is where I think Condorman is more interesting today than it may have been in 1981. At the time, people looked at it and saw a Disney movie trying to be a superhero movie, a spy movie, but not fully succeeding at either, and I understand that. The comedy is hit or miss. The pacing can feel uneven. The action is not always convincing, and the movie never really decides whether Woody is supposed to be a parody of a hero or an actual hero. But looking back now, it has a weird kind of innocence and intelligence. My favorite line from the movie is,
Now I think there is deception and deception.
it took me a while to understand what these words really meant. But when Natalia says it so gracefully and with depth, you can see that Barbara Carrera knew how to deliver this to the camera to let the audience know that the love she was running away from was a deception of mistrust and fear, and she was going to a man who was deceiving her through his fictional character only, hiding his name, not his intentions or heart. He was someone who wouldn't mistreat her or make her live in fear of him, and that he was truly in love with her. Modern superhero movies are often loaded with lore, bad love interests, multiverse rules, timelines, cinematic universes, post-credit scenes, and 20 characters who each need a spin-off. Condorman is a movie where a man draws a bird superhero, puts on wings, crashes into a river, lies to a beautiful spy, and somehow gets government funding for his imagination. That is almost refreshing. It's not complicated, it's just weird. And sometimes weird is enough to make a movie worth talking about decades later. A little side note of my personal connection to this movie before I give you my scoring. This movie is literally where I started to edit a movie on a PC. No joke. I got one of the first commercially available video capture cards, and I mean that there were two cards that needed to work together to get the video into the PC. It was an ATI TV card and an ATI TV tuner card. I had a copy of Condorman, the movie, but the audio and video was degraded in several spots. Most were coloring and static, to which I could re-record the same spots to make them clear when I adjusted the tracking, but the audio was unrecoverable in some spots. And so I had to learn how to splice video and audio in my own bedroom with a PC running Windows 95. The scene just after Natalia and Krakow in Moscow, we go back to Paris, where Russ asks Harry, who is Condorman? Now, my splicing wasn't perfect, and each word was taken from different scenes within the movie. But in 1996, it was techno sorcery. To do this on a home PC, and the fact that I could output it back to a new VHS was absolutely amazing. I am so proud of that cut, even to this day. Enough about my memories. Let's get back to the movie review. Now, you're probably wondering at this point in the video, would I recommend this movie? I give Condorman a solid 8 out of 10. I know it's groundbreaking, and it may sound a little generous depending on how you look at it, because this movie definitely has its problems. The effects are uneven, the tone is all over the place, some of the comedy does not land as well as it did on paper. And as a spy movie, it's not exactly going to make James Bond nervous at the box office. But this is one of those cases where the flaws are part of the identity. Condorman is not great because it's technically perfect. It's enjoyable because it commits to every strange idea with the surprising amount of sincerity. It has a fun cast. It has memorable gadgets. It was a goofy superhero angle. It has a Disney-safe spy adventure tone. It has that early 80s live-action charm where the movie may not fully work, but you can still feel the effort behind it. So would I recommend it? Yes, but with the right exceptions. If you're looking for a serious superhero movie, this is not it. If you're looking for a sharp parody, this is not it. If you're looking for a gorgeous girl to give you some sex appeal, this is not quite that either. But if you like oddball Disney live-action family-friendly movies, forgotten superhero films, weird early 80s experiments, or movies that feel like they were made by people just saying, let's just try this and see what happens, then Condorman is absolutely worth watching. This is, in my opinion, a must-see classic. It's the kind of movie you watch that immediately want to tell someone else, did you know Disney made a superhero spy movie where a comic book artist becomes a bird-themed secret agent and breathes fire from ordering the wrong drink? And honestly, that is enough. Let me know in the comments if you remember Condorman. if this was your first time hearing about it, or if you think Disney should ever bring back this character in some way. And also, let me know what other forgotten superhero or oddball Disney movies you would like me to review next. Before leaving, would you please hit that like and subscribe and the bell to get all of my latest reviews? I'm trying to get to 100 subs, and your help is very much appreciated. Please take a look at my gaming channel over at Nerdivergent 199 Gaming here on YouTube. The link is down in the description. With that said, we'll see you all at the next one. Take care.